Hello and welcome to Firstpost America, your home for the biggest stories shaping the US and the world. I'm Cary, Johnston, live from the Firstpost studios. Our top story on the show today. President Trump says countries that engage in trade with Iran will face a 25% tariff on any business done with the US. Also on the program, Belgium's defense minister proposes a new operation in the Arctic to fend off Trump's security warnings in the region. Russia fires the little-known Oreshnik missile again. But what is this weapon and why is Europe so alarmed? And the US administration says more than 100,000 visas have been cancelled since Donald Trump returned to the White House, hitting students and skilled workers hardest. We begin in Iran. The United States has drawn a new red line, and this one doesn't stop at Tehran. It stretches across the world. President Donald Trump has issued a blunt warning. Any country that trades with Iran will now face a 25% tariff on all business done with the US. Well, Trump announced this in a social media post on Monday. He called the decision final and conclusive. However, he didn't explain how it will be enforced or who exactly will be targeted. But the list is not hard to guess. China trades heavily with Iran. So does Russia, the UAE and Brazil. In fact, China is Iran's largest trading partner, followed by India, Turkey, South Korea and Japan. Well, this is not just about trade. It's also about pressure and timing. Iran has been rocked by widespread anti-government protests over the past week. Protests that have reportedly killed more than 600 people. And Washington believes Tehran is crossing a dangerous threshold. Iran is already under severe US sanctions. It's currently what it calls illicit unilateral sanctions on long-arm jurisdiction. But it's not just the US imposing pressure on Iran. Today, the European Union chief said the alliance would swiftly propose new sanctions on the country. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has repeatedly warned that America could consider military action if Iran continues using lethal force against protesters.
There seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it. And we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination.
Well, according to reports, Trump has already been briefed on covert and military tools. Long-range missile strikes are one option. So are cyber attacks, including efforts to disrupt Iran's command and communication networks. In response, Iran is sending mixed signals. Its foreign minister says Tehran is open to talks with Washington, but he also says the country is prepared for war. Its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has responded with defiance. He accused the US of deceit and praised pro-government rallies. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt revealed that Iranian officials have reached out privately to Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff.
Well, I think one thing President Trump is very good at is always keeping all of his options on the table. And airstrikes would be one of the many, many options that are on the table for the commander-in-chief. Diplomacy is always the first option for the president. He's told all of you last night that what you're hearing publicly from the Iranian regime is quite differently from the messages the administration is receiving privately. And I think the president has an interest in exploring those messages.
Inside Iran, this is no longer just an economic crisis. It's a crisis of legitimacy. And voices from exile are growing louder. Reza Pahlavi, the son of Iran's last Shah, has urged Trump to intervene sooner. The US has already warned American citizens to leave Iran if they can. So where does this all lead? Well, Donald Trump says he's bringing in tariffs as punishment. The specter of military force still on the table. This is no-holds-barred pressure diplomacy, and the world is watching to see whether it forces talks or triggers something far more dangerous. Because when economics, unrest and military threats collide, the consequences are rarely contained. Well, for more on this, we're joined now by, Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations at Macalester College in Minnesota, joining us live from St. Paul. Welcome to the show. So what do you make of Donald Trump's threat to impose tariffs on exports to the US on countries who do deals with Iran?
Well, I think he senses or hopes that the regime in Tehran is on the ropes and that it will take just a little more pressure to bring it crumbling down. He's not entirely wrong. These protests are qualitatively different than some of the waves of protests we've seen before. The closest would be the so-called Green Revolution that didn't take place, fizzled out during the President Obama years. And what would that pressure look like? Well, if you look at the legitimacy of the regime, it rests on three pillars, one of which is delivering the economic goods. It's already failing there. Inflation is something like 70% in Iran right now. They cannot deliver the goods, and that's undermining the credibility of the regime with the working classes, but also the middle classes. The second pillar is the promise that it is a regional superpower, that it can influence politics in the region, and that the government can defend the Iranian people. Well, that's been proven to be false. Hamas is, for all intents and purposes, finished. Hezbollah is finished. And the Israelis and the Americans have demonstrated they can strike downtown Tehran and kill whomever they want. So that leg is gone. And the only leg that's left then is the theocratic leg, the claim that they represent God's will on earth, et cetera, et cetera. And increasingly, Iranians aren't buying that because Iranian society is becoming secularized in many ways. So the three pillars upon which the regime rested are crumbling, and Trump feels with sanctions and maybe a military strike that he can knock the legs out entirely and the stool will crumble.
Well, let me ask you then. That said, what might countries like China do in response then, in a practical sense?
Well, China has to decide if that's a hill that's worth dying on. China does do a lot of trade, which is not actually helping the Iranian economy very much, which I cannot understate. It's in tatters, that economy. So China's not been able to help there. It's not been able to help militarily, which it hasn't even endeavored to do. In that respect, Russia steps in and says, we'll provide you perhaps with weapons and whatnot. And that, as the Venezuelans can attest, the Russian weapons are useless against American weapons. And so that leaves, those are the two sort of patrons, the Russians who are occupied elsewhere, and even their ghost fleet, which sometimes carries Iranian oil, is coming under increasing scrutiny and is being intercepted and boarded all over the place now.
Let me just ask you, can I just jump in there if I may? What
Sure,
of the protests in Tehran and elsewhere in the country then? I mean, the leadership is trying to project an image of control, but how do you see this actually playing out?
Well, it may fizzle out. The security apparatus that the regime has to hand is very effective, and they've already killed 2,000 people, jailed how many more, and intimidated countless numbers. They may have the mechanisms in place to contain this uprising. But as we've seen before, sometimes these things begin slowly and then all of a sudden the regime collapses. The whole Arab Spring phenomenon, for example. Now, be careful what you wish for if you're wishing for that to happen, because as we know throughout the Middle East and elsewhere, when autocratic regimes fail, it's not simply the case that a democratic one replaces it. Often these states fall apart. There's civil war, there's fragmentation and fracturing, there's foreign intervention, there's all sorts of escalations. So the collapse of Iran in that sense is, the best scenario would be a peaceful transition to a democratic government. The more likely one is the Iraqi or Syrian example, sort of transported over the border, collapse of the Iranian regime, creation of a vacuum, a huge ethnic discord within Iran, so separatist movements. I think we're looking at chaos rather than peaceful transition.
Andrew Latham, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Firstpost America. Thank you. Now moving on to what NATO calls the High North, a region which was once described as low tension, but that description no longer holds. Belgium's defence minister has issued a clear call. He says NATO needs new thinking in the Arctic. His proposal is for a NATO operation in the High North to address growing security concerns. Well, the High North covers some of the world's most sensitive geography, the Arctic, the North Atlantic and strategic sea lanes that are becoming more accessible as ice melts due to climate change. For years, NATO spoke of keeping tensions low in this region, but reality has caught up. Russia remains the dominant Arctic power and has poured resources into military bases, ports and infrastructure. China, despite having no Arctic coastline, now calls itself a near-Arctic state, and it's investing accordingly. Belgium's Defence Minister Theo Franken says NATO already has a blueprint. Last year, the alliance launched Baltic Sentry, a mission to protect undersea cables and pipelines after a wave of mysterious damage in late 2024. There's also Eastern Sentry, designed to strengthen NATO's air presence after Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace. Well, the idea now is to adapt these missions for the Arctic. Reports also state that Germany is preparing to formally propose a new NATO Arctic mission. Meanwhile, Denmark's Prime Minister has called this a decisive moment.
I agree that it is important that there is security and peace and security in the Arctic region. That is one of the reasons why we are in NATO. Greenland is also a member of NATO. It is a shared responsibility of the Arctic states, including the Kingdom, to ensure that there is security, peace and freedom in the Arctic region.
Well, this brings us to Greenland because it's become the center of a much bigger storm. US President Donald Trump is focusing on Greenland again after the dramatic capture of Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro. Well, soon after, the White House confirmed that Trump was considering making an offer to buy the territory. Trump believes America must own Greenland to prevent China or Russia from gaining control.
We're talking about acquiring, not leasing, not having it short term. We're talking about acquiring. And if we don't do it, Russia or China will, and that's not going to happen.
On Monday, Greenland's coalition government made its position clear. It said the island will intensify efforts to ensure that its defense happens strictly under NATO. It said all NATO members, including the United States, share responsibility for its defense. Well, this is where NATO's Article 5 becomes crucial. Collective defense is the alliance's core principle, but there's a catch. Article 5 requires unanimous agreement, so a conflict between two NATO members creates a deadlock. The alliance cannot go to war against itself, and that's why Denmark has issued a stark warning.
Firstly, I believe that the American president should be taken seriously when he says that he wants Greenland. But I also want to make it clear that if the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. That is, including our NATO, and thus the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War.
So why has Greenland become so contentious? 80% of the island is covered in ice. Its population is small. Its economy relies heavily on fishing and Danish subsidies. But beneath that ice lies valuable rare earth minerals, uranium, iron, and possibly vast oil and gas reserves. As global warming melts the ice sheet, access becomes easier and strategic interests become greater. And Trump's focus on resources is not new. We've seen it in Venezuela. We're now seeing it in the Arctic. Well, there may be a thaw in the ice, but the competition to control and exploit the resources below is definitely hotting up. Well, still to come on the program, President Trump is milking the attention with an image designed to promote the full-fat dairy drink. But critics say America is fat enough. The first tensions have risen sharply after Russia fired a rare nuclear-capable ballistic missile into western Ukraine. It led to swift condemnation from the United States, the United Kingdom and European leaders. The strike hit the Lviv region close to the Polish border and NATO territory. Moscow says it targeted an aircraft repair plant. Ukraine confirmed the ballistic missile attack but refused to identify the site. What has alarmed Western capitals most, though, is the weapon itself, the Oreshnik. Our next report brings you more now on what the Oreshnik ballistic missile is and why its use has put Europe on edge.
After Russia's strike on Ukraine's western Lviv region, the reaction spread almost as fast as the missile itself. Condemnation came from Washington, London, and European capitals within hours. The United States called the launch an inexplicable escalation. The UK warned of reckless behavior and the risk of miscalculation. Across Europe, leaders said the use of a nuclear-capable missile had pushed the war into far more dangerous territory.
This constitutes another dangerous and inexplicable escalation of this war, even as the United States is urgently working with Kyiv, other partners, and Moscow to end the war through a negotiated settlement.
What unsettled Western governments was not only where the missile landed, it was what had been launched. Russia had fired the Oreshnik. On 9th December, Moscow says the missile struck the Lviv State Aircraft Repair Plant, a facility it claims services Ukrainian MiG-29s and Western-supplied F-16 fighter jets. Ukraine also confirmed that the ballistic missile struck the region but refused to identify the target, calling it civilian. However, residents living nearby described explosions, buildings shaking, and gas supplies cutting out.
It seems they used Oreshnik. There were explosions. Then the gas supply dropped sharply. We have an individual boiler. The boiler would not ignite. It was cold, and it is winter. At night, it was -14.
This was not a routine strike. It was only the second confirmed combat use of the Oreshnik since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The first came in November 2024, when an apparently vacant factory in Dnipro was hit. This time, the missile flew far west, towards Europe's edge. For context, Lviv lies less than an hour's drive from Poland. That short distance transformed a regional attack into an international signal. Western defense officials classify the Oreshnik as a medium to intermediate range ballistic missile. Its estimated range is between 3,000 and 5,500 kilometers, which places most of Europe within reach from Russian territory. The Oreshnik also moves faster than most modern missiles, at an estimated 8,000 miles per hour or 13,000 kilometers per hour. Therefore, it is most likely that the Oreshnik warheads weigh less, at approximately 150 kilograms each. This is not a weapon designed for routine battlefield use. It is built to be noticed. Speed defines the Oreshnik. After launch, the missile climbs steeply and exits the atmosphere. It then plunges back towards Earth at hypersonic velocity. That flight path leaves almost no warning time. It also makes interception extremely difficult. Ukraine's air defense systems are not designed to stop a missile that leaves the atmosphere and re-enters at such speed. As it descends, the missile reveals what makes it especially feared. The Oreshnik can release multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, known as MIRVs. Each warhead separates mid-flight. Each can be aimed at a different target. One missile can therefore deliver several strikes almost simultaneously. The image explains the name. Oreshnik means hazel tree, inspired by the branching streaks of fire seen as the warheads fall. After the first strike in 2024, Ukrainians gave it another name, Kedar. The Oreshnik is nuclear capable, though Russia insists it has so far used only conventional warheads. Even without a nuclear payload, its use carries heavy symbolism. This class of missile was designed during the Cold War for nuclear deterrence, not conventional warfare. Moscow says the strike was in retaliation for an alleged Ukrainian drone attack on a residence linked to Vladimir Putin. However, Kyiv denies the claim. The United States says it doubts the incident occurred. Western officials instead describe the launch as deliberate signaling. The Kremlin has since claimed multiple Oreshnik missiles are in production, with some potentially stationed in Belarus, a move that would bring much of Europe even closer within range. Militarily, analysts say the damage from a conventional Oreshnik strike may be limited, but politically, the impact is far greater.
You know, this is a new capability, but it is not a capability that represents a dramatic change in the way that conventional weapons are developed. It's a series of old technologies that have been put together in a new way.
This launch was not about immediate battlefield gains. It was about reach, about speed, about warning. Some weapons are fired to destroy. Others are launched to be noticed. The Oreshnik belongs firmly to the second category. And this time, its message was aimed well beyond Ukraine.
Moving on now to Trump's hardline immigration crackdown. America has been tightening its doors for students, tourists and workers alike. It's one of the largest visa purges ever seen. The US State Department announced the latest figures on Monday. Well, since Donald Trump's return to office in January, more than 100,000 visas have been revoked. The US government says it's about law enforcement and national security. But this hardline stance has shaken families, universities and businesses. Officials say it includes tourist visas, student visas and work permits. All were cancelled under fresh screening procedures under the immigration curb. The State Department argues that these individuals had encounters with US law enforcement for criminal activity. While students and skilled workers are among the worst affected, at least 8,000 student visas were revoked and 2,500 specialized work visas were cancelled. And thousands more tourists and short-term travelers were also denied. Officials insist the revocations are case by case and not blanket bans. But the scale and speed at which this crackdown is unfolding is worrying. It fits squarely into President Trump's long-held immigration doctrine. The administration says visa holders must be held to the highest standards, and that any violation, even minor, can justify cancellation. It argues this policy protects American jobs, reduces crime, and strengthens border security. Well, these are the exact themes that Trump campaigned on before taking office. And this isn't new territory for Trump. During his first term, his administration imposed travel bans, cut refugee admissions, and tightened visa approvals. And yet, alongside the crackdowns, the US government has also launched new programs. A new Gold Card initiative was launched by Trump in December, a high-cost route to US residency, costing a minimum of $1 million for wealthy foreign investors, with a $15,000 non-returnable processing fee.
This is the Gold Card, as you know. The Secretary of Commerce and myself and some others have been working on it for quite a while. And Howard, how much have we sold in a few days?
$1.3 billion worth in a matter of a couple of days.
That's essentially it's the green card on steroids, and it's a pathway, and it's been an amazing thing.
However, what's different with all of this now is the scale. The current revocation is more than 150% higher than last year. This makes it the largest annual visa cancellation on record. And the repercussions from this has had far-reaching consequences. Universities are warning that international students bring billions of dollars into the US economy and fuel research and innovation. Tech companies and hospitals say skilled foreign workers are already in short supply. And sudden visa cancellations create uncertainty and talent gaps. And for families, the impact is personal. Students forced to abandon degrees, workers separated from jobs, and visitors stranded mid-journey. But perhaps the most striking change in visa policy affects the H-1B visas. In September, when the White House announced a $100,000 fee on new H-1B visa applications, well, this was a dramatic jump from a few $1,000s before. The Trump administration claimed it was to curb abuse of the system and encourage companies to hire more American employees. So while the 100,000 plus visa cancellations grab headlines, they are part of a bigger immigration policy. America is redefining its relationship with foreign talent, businesses and opportunity. And we'll keep you up to date on what these policies mean for people around the world. Well, Donald Trump's return to the White House has come with many now familiar sights: executive orders, punchy slogans and policy announcements designed to travel fast on social media. But now, here's another one to add to the list: a milk mustache. And the US Department of Agriculture shared an image of Trump leaning against his Oval Office desk with a glass of milk and a conspicuous white streak on his upper lip. It wasn't just a nostalgic nod to the Got Milk era ads of the 90s. It was a statement of intent, branded with the line, "The milk mustache is back, drink whole milk." Well, the Post made clear that full-fat dairy is no longer a dietary villain, at least not in Trump's America. Online, skeptics were fast and very loud. One user mocked the image and stated that the team put the wrong mustache on him. Another user suggested the sudden enthusiasm for dairy was, well, not so subtle sign that milk sales must be in trouble. Others went further. "Hope next year this says raw milk," one commentator quipped, well, leaning into the administration's appetite for controversy. And some pointed to basic biology rather than politics. More than one user noting that over a third of Americans are lactose intolerant, questioning the wisdom of a one-size-fits-all dairy decree. Another was blunter still: America is fat enough without whole milk. Well, the viral image landed just days after the USDA released new dietary guidelines that dramatically depart from decades of federal nutrition advice. Under Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the updated guidance places full-fat dairy, protein and fats at the center of the American diet, while grains, once the foundation of the food pyramid, have been pushed to the margins.
The new guidelines recognize that whole, nutrient-dense food is the most effective path to better health and lower healthcare costs. Protein and healthy fats are essential and were wrongly discouraged in prior dietary guidelines. We are ending the war on saturated fats. Diets rich in vegetables and fruits reduce disease risk more effectively than many drugs. Whole grains outperform refined carbohydrates. Added sugars, especially sugar-sweetened beverages, drive metabolic disease or on added sugar.
Well, under the new guidelines, Americans are encouraged to consume 3 servings of full-fat dairy a day, while keeping saturated fat under 10% of daily calories. Critics say the message risks oversimplifying complex nutritional science, but supporters argue it restores balance after decades of fear-driven advice. Health organizations have urged caution, though. The American Heart Association continues to recommend low-fat or fat-free dairy, warning that full-fat options may raise heart disease risk if consumed excessively. Well, in the end, Trump's whole milk push is about more than what Americans pour into their cereal bowls. It's about rewriting the story of health, authority and trust, and doing it in a way that's instantly recognizable, shareable and politically loaded. Whether whole milk truly delivers the health revival Trump promises remains up for debate. But as a symbol of a broader rejection of modern dietary dogma, the message couldn't be clearer. In Trump's America, fat is back, and it has a mustache. That's it for the show today, but we'll be back tomorrow. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Bye-bye for now. The world doesn't fit in boxes, so why should your news? From battlefields